They called it, trade history calls it theft. For centuries, a handful of European nations extended their empires across the globe, claiming lands that weren't theirs. We're often taught this history as a story of discovery and progress. But for the vast majority of the world, it was the start of a deep and lasting inequality, one that still shapes our planet today. How did this happen? How did a system that officially ended decades ago leave a legacy of disparity that we still can't unshake? Let's unravel the economic blueprint of colonialism and see how it systematically engineered global inequality. Before the age of empires took hold, the world was a very different place. Wealth wasn't concentrated in one corner of the globe. In fact, powerful and prosperous civilizations flourished everywhere. Think of the Mughal Empire in India, renowned for its textiles and spices, controlling a significant chunk of the world's GDP, or the Ming and Qing dynasties in China, centers of innovation and vast trading networks. In West Africa, empires like Mali and Songhai were rich with gold, salt, and centers of learning like Timbuktu. These weren't undeveloped regions waiting to be discovered. They were sophisticated societies with their own economies, technologies, and global connections. The economic gap between, say, Europe and Asia was relatively small. So what changed? The arrival of ships armed not just with goods for trade, but with cannons and a new aggressive ideology. The first step in creating inequality was simple and brutal: extraction. Colonial powers didn't arrive as equal trading partners. They came as conquerors. Their primary goal was to drain the wealth of the colonies to enrich the mother country. This wasn't just about gold and silver, though they took plenty of that, like the Spanish did from the Americas, devastating the Inca and Aztec empires. It was about everything. Rubber from the Congo, diamonds from South Africa, tea from India, sugar from the Caribbean. These resources were not bought at fair market prices. They were often taken by force through violence, enslavement, or exploitative labor systems that were barely a step up from slavery. Take the Belgian Congo, for example. Under King Leopold II, it wasn't even a colony in the traditional sense, but his personal property. The local population was forced into harvesting rubber with unimaginable brutality. Failure to meet quotas could result in mutilation or death. This system generated immense personal wealth for Leopold and fueled Belgium's industrial growth while completely decimating the local society and economy. This wasn't trade. It was a state-sanctioned heist on a continental scale. The wealth flowing out of the colonies was the seed capital for the Industrial Revolution in Europe. The very factories and machines that propelled Europe into modernity were built on the backs and with the resources of colonized peoples. Next, the colonial powers deliberately dismantled existing local industries. Why? To eliminate competition and create captive markets for their own manufactured goods. India was a world leader in textiles for centuries. Its fabrics were prized for their quality and craftsmanship. When the British took control, they hit India with a 1-2 punch. First, they imposed high tariffs and outright bans on Indian textiles being sold in Britain, protecting their own burgeoning mills. Second, they flooded the Indian market with cheap, machine-made cloth from Manchester. Indian weavers couldn't compete. An entire industry that had supported millions of people for generations was systematically destroyed. India went from being a major exporter of finished goods to an exporter of raw cotton, which was then shipped to Britain, turned into cloth, and sold back to India at a profit. The colony's role was reversed, from producer to a dependent consumer. This pattern was repeated across the world, crushing local economies and making them reliant on the empire. To manage this global system of extraction and control, colonial powers built specific kinds of infrastructure. They built railways, ports, and roads. On the surface, this sounds like development, and it's often cited as a positive legacy of colonialism. But look closer at the maps. Where did these railways lead? They didn't connect local villages or markets to foster internal trade. They ran from the resource-rich interior, the mine, the plantation, directly to the port, so that raw materials could be shipped out to Europe as efficiently as possible. This infrastructure wasn't designed for the benefit of the local population. It was designed to streamline their exploitation. It reoriented entire economies outward, towards the colonizer, rather than inward, towards self-sufficiency and local growth. Then there's the human element. Colonialism wasn't just about economics. It was about establishing a social hierarchy. To justify their rule, colonizers promoted racist ideologies that deemed the local populations as inferior, incapable of self-governance. This had devastating economic consequences. Access to education, healthcare, and skilled jobs was severely restricted for the colonized people. The best schools, the best hospitals, and the top positions in government and business were reserved for the European settlers. This created a massive skills gap and prevented the development of a local class of educated professionals, administrators, and entrepreneurs. When independence finally came, many new nations were left with a population that had been systematically denied the education and experience needed to run a modern state and economy. They were set up to fail. Another key strategy was divide and rule. Colonial administrators often exploited existing ethnic or religious tensions, or even created new ones to maintain control. They would favor one group over another, granting them privileges and positions of power. The Belgians did this in Rwanda with the Hutus and Tutsis, creating a distinction that had been far more fluid before their arrival and laying the groundwork for future conflict. This strategy was effective for control, but it left behind a legacy of internal division and instability. When the colonizers left, these artificially heightened tensions often erupted into civil wars and political chaos, making stable economic development nearly impossible. A nation at war with itself cannot build a prosperous future. And what happened when these countries finally gained their independence in the mid-20th century? They weren't starting from a level playing field. They were starting from a position of profound disadvantage. Their economies had been rewired for decades, even centuries, to serve another country's interests. Their industries were gone. Their people lacked education and training. Their political institutions were fragile, often plagued by the divisions sown by their former rulers. They were also frequently saddled with debt, sometimes even having to pay the former colonial power for the privilege of the infrastructure that was used to exploit them. Haiti is a tragic example, forced to pay a massive debt to France after its independence, a debt that crippled its economy for over a century. In the post-colonial era, the dynamics of power didn't just disappear, they evolved. The old colonial empires were replaced by new systems of economic influence. International financial institutions, multinational corporations, and global trade rules were largely designed by the very same Western powers that had been the colonizers. Often, the terms of loans and trade agreements favored the developed world, creating a cycle of debt and dependency that has been called neocolonialism. A developing nation might need a loan to build a hospital, but the conditions attached to that loan might force them to open their markets to foreign companies, which then outcompete local businesses, continuing the old cycle in a new form. So, when we look at a map of the world today and see the stark lines between rich and poor nations, it's not an accident. It's not because some cultures are harder working or some are less developed. It is the direct, measurable result of a historical process that systematically enriched one part of the world at the expense of the other. The wealth of the global North is inextricably linked to the poverty of the global South. The palaces and museums of London, Paris, and Brussels are filled with treasures and funded by wealth that was extracted from Asia, Africa, and the Americas. The legacy of this global imbalance is everywhere. It's in the trade deficits, the international debt, the political instability, and the migration patterns that define our modern world. Understanding this history isn't about assigning guilt. It's about understanding the truth. It's about recognizing that the global economic system we live in today was not built on fairness and free trade for all. It was built on a foundation of conquest, extraction, and profound injustice. Colonialism ended. The balance sheet didn't. The economic, political, and psychological scars remain, and acknowledging their origins is the first step toward imagining a more just and equitable world for everyone. Thank you so much for watching. If this video gave you a new perspective on global history, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the forces that shape our world. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next one.